I want you to retreat into the depths of your brain for a second, and imagine that I've strapped you to a time machine and have sent you all the way back to prehistoric Argentina during the late Miocene period, let's say between 6 to 9 million years ago. Now, think about those very first few steps out of the time machine, and then being told that a prehistoric creature is now hunting you. Where are you going to look first? Well, probably right around you, peering back and forth, and to the sides, trying to get a lock on some prehistoric nightmare charging straight at you. Or if I was exceptionally cruel and dropped you into a body of water, you'd probably just close your eyes and give up. Or perhaps look down. The point is, in both of these scenarios, I doubt your first reaction will be to look up, seeing that given the predators and animals that live around us now, we generally don't think of dangers coming from above. And yet, here in prehistoric Argentina, all those millions of years ago, that is exactly where you want to have your eyes peeled. For it was in this ancient place that the largest bird to ever fly existed. And it wasn't exactly a friendly kind of big bird either. This was the Argentavis, the pinnacle of avian dinosaurs, and just about the scariest bird to ever fly. The story of its place in our history is relatively recent, despite its ancient age, only being put on our radars in the last few decades, as it was in 1980 that its existence was first made aware of. The holotype for this creature was discovered in a country that's no stranger to terrifying prehistoric animals, which would be, of course, again, Argentina, wherein a group of paleontologists from the Museo de la Plata had stumbled upon the remains of a skull, a quadrate, and various parts of the legs and arms of a bird, which were found in the Huayquarian Epecuén formation of the La Pampa province. The bones themselves had been badly crushed and were quite fragmentary, so not exactly in pristine condition. Yet, the team was able to still clearly tell three things. 1, that they had found a bird, 2, that it was a new kind of species, and 3, that it was huge, leading to it being described and named based on the location it was found, giving it the name Argentavis magnificens, meaning the magnificent Argentine bird, or the magnificent silver bird. So a pretty strong start. And things would only get more grand, as within the coming years, more excursions at the site revealed 3 more partially complete skeletons, which confirmed again that this was a new creature and one of record-breaking proportions, and it very quickly gained some hype in the media, as who doesn't love the thought of giant birds like those straight out of The Lord of the Rings? The only problem is that estimating the true size of the Argentavis has proved a bit tricky due to limited material. In its original description, the founders of the bones gave it a mammoth wingspan of 7.5 meters or 24 feet 7 inches, making it almost laughably larger than any other bird, and on par with the giant pterosaurs of old, even outsizing the likes of Coloborhynchus, the pterosaur that once held the title for the largest toothed pterosaur. And another way to really think about the scale of this size is that this wingspan is about double the length of a fully grown rhino. And afterwards, things somehow got even more crazy, as the estimates were not reduced in the coming years, but instead increased, with a slightly larger size of 8.3 meters or 27 feet being proposed. Meaning you could place 3 of the biggest bald eagles flying around side by side with their wings fully outstretched and still have more room to fill. That's how big this bird supposedly was. But since then, things for the Argentavis have cooled down slightly, as nowadays estimates typically suggest that fully grown individuals had a wingspan of about 6 meters or nearly 20 feet, which is still obviously absolutely giant and is almost double that of the current largest living bird by wingspan, the wandering albatross. And really, there is only one bird known to rival the size of the Argentavis, the fellow extinct Pelagornis sandersi, a type of pseudo-toothed bird that inhabited the coast of South Carolina and possessed a wingspan that was equal to that of the Argentavis's first size estimate, giving it the crown for the widest wingspan. Yet with that said, if you made a Pelagornis and Argentavis fly into each other, let alone fight, I guarantee you that the Pelagornis is going to get absolutely creamed, for the Argentavis had comfortably retained the title as the heaviest bird to ever fly. And by that argument, it's also still the biggest to rule the skies, with the max reasonable estimates of its weight standing around 72 kilos or 159 pounds. So similar to the weight you see in mid-sized jaguars. And for reference, the golden eagle, which is used to hunt wolves in Mongolia, is over 10 times lighter. So just imagine what this beast could do. And it also, by the way, greatly outweighs the Pelagornis, which is only half its weight, despite being longer. So I ask again, who is the real big bird? Not to mention that even when just standing around, it greatly outsized the Pelagornis, as when it was not in flight, but walking on land, its head would have likely peered straight over you, coming in at 6.5 feet or nearly 2 meters. Again, imagine this, a 2-meter tall bird that can fly. Yeah. In addition to its intimidating size, another area where the Argentavis easily beats the Pelagornis is sheer scariness. As Pelagornis was something of a supersized seagull, being a seabird that lived along the coast and fed primarily on fish, using its pseudo-like teeth to nip and grip large slimy sushis, if you will, while on the other hand, Argentavis was something more of a menace, but exactly what kind of menace is a little blurry around the edges. Historically, it has been classified as belonging to the family of prehistoric birds known as the Pterosaur, which were birds of prey that lived in North and South America from the end days of the Oligocene all the way up to the late Pleistocene. And as far as we can tell, they are most closely related to the extant New World vultures. And because of this, it's sometimes been thought that they probably looked a lot like them too, and perhaps acted in similar ways, being scavengers that scoured huge swathes of land for opportunity, while then perhaps also being kleptoparasites. In other words, taking hunted prey away from other predators, using their size, giant razor-sharp beaks, and talons as effective debate tools, so you could say. Though, in reality, it's also thought that the Argentavis was really a bit more feisty than being just your simple neighborhood scavenger and bully, as specifically the legs that it possessed were relatively long for its already huge size, as well as being powerful and sturdy, leading to the new idea that the Argentavis would fly around the skies looking for prey, before then landing on the ground, where it would then proceed to actually chase its prey down, and often swallow them whole thanks to their highly flexible mouths that could create a massive gape that was big enough to gulp down a full-sized hare in one swift go. And that might not sound that big, but for the record, not even a wolf can do that. Of course though, in this scenario they likely still would have scavenged whenever given the chance. And then there is also a small subset of people that are still hopeful, so you could say, that Argentavis was basically a big, giant eagle that swooped up anything and everything it saw, utilizing its powerful talons in its beak once more. But I will say, this reasoning seems somewhat unlikely, as unlike an eagle, the Argentavis was a bit of a weak flyer, having a lightly built frame, all things considered, that would have made it rather inefficient at actions such as flapping, and thus a hunting tactic that relied a lot on flying doesn't seem like it would make much sense. And thus, some paleontologists think that flying was more reserved for finding the carrion, spotting targets, or simply traveling, as Argentavis did have an incredibly large range, with paleontologists estimating that the domain of one individual might have been 500 square kilometers, or 190 square miles, which is larger than the size of most cities, including Philadelphia. And so obviously, that's a lot of space, even for the biggest animal to ever fly. And the flying portion also leads to another question which paleontologists have, and this is, how exactly did the Argentavis even manage to fly in the first place, given its massive size? And the answer to that is, it might have needed to rely on a mix of different strategies in the right conditions to get the job done, so to speak. For example, it's believed that to even get off the ground, an individual would have needed to reach 40 kilometers or 25 miles per hour to lift off, so a bit like a living plane. And that's not exactly slow, as it's not even far off of Usain Bolt's fastest speed. So again, we're not talking about a light run here. And despite what you may be thinking right now, its long legs were not sufficient to allow the bird to run at these speeds. In reality, to achieve this, it's thought that the Argentavis would just yeet itself off cliffs and drops, or run into very strong winds whereupon it would lift off. But personally, I like the yeeting idea better. And then once actually in the air, the Argentavis likely needed some additional help to stay afloat, utilizing a tactic known as thermal soaring, wherein it would essentially ride columns of warm air like an elevator, as warm air rises, which would then not only make flying possible, but also help reduce the amount of flapping required. And then when it did flap, it was, of course, helpful that these guys had their giant wings, which when extended, took up an area of about 91 square feet, which is, by the way, larger than some studio apartments you'll find in New York City. However, like I briefly mentioned before, despite being huge, the Argentavis did have more graceful wings, so to speak, in the sense that like most other birds, its wings were highly sensitive parts of their body, and were prone to injury. And thus, despite being giant, they did have to be very careful, especially when engaging with other predators. Though, lucky for this bird, there wasn't a whole lot of equal competition around, and based off the locality in which it was discovered, it suggested that the largest mammalian predators would have been the likes of the saber-toothed Sparassodonts, namely the Thalicosmilus, which in most cases was smaller than the Argentavis. And even at its max weight estimate, it was still vastly beat by the Argentavis in just about every other department, with the bird being wider, longer, and taller. So I don't think any of these guys are trying to take down this giant, or even trying to stop it. And the same goes for pretty much every other mammalian predator in its vicinity, who posed even less of a threat, mainly being made up of smaller Sparassodonts, procyonids that were no bigger than raccoons, and various kinds of smaller rodents. In fact, of all the animals discovered within its locality, only one is known to have been larger, and it was ironically another bird, yet not one capable of flight, as I'm talking about the terror bird. These guys really don't need a whole introduction. But for a quick recap, these were typically giant predatorial birds that ruled South America for millions of years. And here in Argentina at the time, things weren't so different, with 3 different kinds having coexisted with the Argentavis. Yet just one of them outsized it, and that would be the Devonsenzia. This was coincidentally not just a fellow big bird, but literally one of the largest terror birds to have ever evolved in their over 40 million years of existence, with bones suggesting that matured adults would have stood as tall as 2.4 meters or 7.9 feet, while weighing up to 350 kilograms or 770 pounds. So we're essentially talking about a bear-sized bird, and one that was armed with a giant razor-sharp beak and long powerful legs that had some very pointy claws on the end of them. Which is all to say that this was one tough predator, and likely the only thing the Argentavis had to be on edge around. Fortunately for our boy though, or girl, the Argentavis had the opportunity to fly and find areas where the terror birds were not. And along with flight, the Argentavis had some pretty nifty other traits that allowed it to be highly successful in Argentina. And this included exceptionally keen eyes, and it's thought that its eyesight would have been similar to that of modern-day eagles and vultures, requiring that same telescopic level of vision in order to spot a variety of prey and carrion from above. And though not to the same degree as its eyes, paleontologists do believe that the Argentavis also had a pretty powerful sense of smell that might have been similar to that of living carrion birds, in the sense that they could explicitly pick up on distinct odors created by deceased animals up to a mile away, even if the body was out of sight or partially covered up. In other words, if there was a dead body around, the Argentavis was among the first to know about it. And based off of the formations in which it lived, this food on any given day might have been made up of procyonids, Polydilopomorphia, didelphomorphs, xenarthins, rodents, various reptiles, Litopterns, and odoungulates. So it definitely had some fair pickings to choose from, which is certainly a bonus for ensuring that any offspring they had were well fed. And this is especially important in their case, as the offspring of the Argentavis were just like their parents, absolute whoppers. The eggs alone on these guys are believed to have weighed almost 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds. So just slightly smaller than that of an ostrich's egg, meaning the chicks came out big and ready to throw down, or chow down. And it seems that baby Argentavises quite enjoy the company of their parents, as it's believed they stayed in their nest for an unusually long time, up to 16 months to be exact, whereas many birds' chicks stay for less than a year in the vicinity. And this could be due to flying being a bit more tricky for them to learn, as well as they might be waiting to reach a size in which predation became less of a reality for them. Whatever the case though, it all seemed to work out nicely for the Argentavis, as it was highly successful within Miocene Argentina. That being said though, the giant bird would relatively quickly experience trouble, as before the Miocene had even ended, about 6.8 million years ago, the Argentavis had all but been erased from the fossil record. No more big bird. And in some ways, the disappearance of this bird is quite mysterious, as its family, the Pterosauridae, did just fine, and fine for a long time afterwards, proceeding to exist until just 10,000 years ago. While additionally, no explicit extinction event is known to have affected Argentina at the time of its disappearance. However, there is a loose hypothesis which is based off of the global climate of the late Miocene, where at that point the Earth saw global cooling. And this might have caused faunal turnover in the area and changed the environment in a way that harmed the Argentavis, likely making flying harder as the colder temps meant less warm air to surf on. And though it's absolutely more than possible that something else took them out, I would certainly not be surprised if it was Mother Nature that abruptly ended their existence. Because as you all know, it has quite the tendency for that, coming in at just perhaps under us. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, on ExtinctZoo.